Welcome to Story Horizon. I'm the storyteller, here to help you drift into a peaceful sleep tonight. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more soothing stories. And let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Now, settle in, take a deep breath, and let yourself relax. Let's begin our journey. Story 1. It was a quiet, rainy evening when Henry stumbled upon the letter. He'd been sifting through a box of his late wife's belongings, a task he'd avoided for years. Rain pattered against the windows, a steady hum in the background, as he sat alone in their living room, warmed by a single dim lamp. The house felt too quiet these days, empty echoes filling spaces where laughter once resided. But tonight, he felt ready, or at least as close to ready as he would ever be. As he went through her things, her favorite scarf, a stack of old postcards, and a half-empty perfume bottle, a small, yellowed envelope caught his eye. It was tucked between the pages of a poetry book they'd both loved, a book he hadn't opened in ages. He slid the envelope out, his fingers trembling slightly as he saw her familiar, looping handwriting on the front. To Henry, for someday when you need it most. He hesitated. What could she have left for him to read, knowing it would be after she was gone? The words felt like a whisper from the past, and he wasn't sure he was ready to hear it. But something in the stillness of the evening, combined with the soft patter of rain, encouraged him to open it. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper folded neatly. He unfolded it carefully, as if any sudden movement might erase her words. And then he began to read. My dear Henry, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there with you. And if you're reading it now, it also means that you're probably missing me more than usual. Perhaps more than you thought you would. I know you, my love. You're probably sitting there with that worried crease in your brow, wondering how you're supposed to keep going without me. But I need you to know, Henry, that you are stronger than you think. You have always been. As he read, his chest tightened, a mix of sorrow and comfort washing over him. She always had a way of seeing him, even when he thought he was hiding behind his quiet strength. He could almost hear her voice as he read, as if she were sitting beside him. Remember how we used to talk about the little moments, Henry? The mornings by the lake, the quiet dinners by candlelight. Those were the moments that made our life together so full. You don't need to live in those memories alone. Live with them as part of you, not as a shadow. I'm part of those moments too, but I am also part of you now. Every day, even after I'm gone, I want you to promise me something. Find beauty, even if it's just a sliver, even if it's the smallest thing. Find it in the rain, in a book, in a quiet moment over a cup of tea. Because those little things are what kept us going, what made us strong. The rain outside picked up, turning from a gentle tap to a steady beat, a sound that felt oddly soothing now, as if it were marking each precious word. He could almost feel her hand resting on his, could imagine the warmth of her touch. She was with him, somehow, in this letter. I know you'll be all right, Henry. I know you'll find a way to smile again, even if it takes time. I can picture it now. That half-smile of yours that you try to hide when you're deep in thought. But don't hide it from the world, love. Share it, because that's what life is. A collection of shared smiles, shared laughs, shared tears. There's one last thing I need you to do, my dear. I need you to forgive yourself. I know you think you should have done more, should have somehow protected me from what happened. But life has its own way of teaching us to let go. And this, Henry, is something you have to let go. Hold on to our memories, but not to guilt. I need you to promise me that. Can you do that for me? By now, his eyes were blurred with tears, and he had to pause, taking a shaky breath. She always knew, didn't she? She always understood the weight he carried in silence, the way he clung to if only, and what if. Her words felt like a balm to an ache he hadn't even realized had rooted itself so deeply in his heart. I hope that by the time you reach the end of this letter, you're smiling, even just a little. I hope you know that you are loved, even now, and that my love didn't disappear just because I'm no longer there. So, when you're ready, let the light in again, Henry. Open the curtains, let the sun or the rain come in, and let yourself feel alive. I want you to promise me that you'll live a little more each day, and that one day you'll be at peace. With all my love, now and forever. Alice. He sat there long after he'd finished the letter, the words lingering in the air, wrapping around him like a warm embrace. He could almost hear her laughter echoing faintly, her gentle reminder to find beauty even in the smallest things. And for the first time in years, he felt something lift, as if a weight had finally fallen away. The rain had softened again, falling gently, almost as if it were her touch, light and comforting. He looked out the window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass, each one glistening with a faint reflection of light. In that quiet moment, he knew he'd keep his promise. He'd look for the small moments of beauty, hold their memories close, but not too tight, and somehow, he'd begin to let the light in again. The rain outside continued its steady rhythm, a soft lullaby in the night, and Henry, with a heart both heavy and light, whispered softly to the silence, "Thank you, Alice." Story 2. It was one of those rare, drizzly afternoons when the whole world seemed wrapped in a soft, gray fog, the kind that made you want to curl up inside and watch the rain run down the windows. But Sophie, a girl with more curiosity than caution, had other plans. As soon as the first raindrops started to fall, she slipped on her favorite red rain boots and headed outside, loving the way each step sent a splash of water around her feet. She made her way to the small park near her house, a quiet place filled with old oak trees and winding paths that only the locals knew. It was there, as she was hopping from one puddle to the next, that she noticed something out of the ordinary. A small, scruffy dog, huddled under a park bench, shivering. The dog was thin, with matted fur and a sad, lost look in his eyes. His coat was a blend of colors, grays, browns, and hints of white around his face that made him look a bit older. Sophie's heart went out to him instantly. She approached slowly, crouching down a few feet away. "Hey there," she whispered softly, not wanting to scare him. The dog's ears perked up, but he didn't move. Instead, he stared at her with a mix of fear and curiosity. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small piece of granola bar, the only snack she had on her. She extended it toward him, watching as his nose twitched, catching the scent. Slowly, he edged closer, inch by inch, until he gently took the treat from her hand. She could see his ribs beneath his tangled fur and noticed a slight limp as he stepped forward. He looked as if he hadn't been taken care of in a long time, and Sophie wondered how long he'd been out here alone. She knew she couldn't just leave him there. "Do you want to come home with me?" she asked softly, not really expecting an answer. But to her surprise, the dog stepped closer, pressing his cold, wet nose against her hand as if to say yes. She named him Rusty, inspired by the flecks of reddish-brown in his fur, and gently coaxed him along the winding path back to her house. The two of them trudged home, side by side, as the rain fell softly around them, each puddle reflecting the quiet bond that was forming between them. Back at home, Sophie's mom was surprised to see her daughter standing in the doorway, soaked through and holding onto a scruffy, trembling dog. She didn't say no, though. Her mom had always taught her to be kind to those who needed help, and one look at Rusty made it clear he was in need of a little kindness. Sophie and her mom spent the evening cleaning Rusty up, carefully rinsing the mud from his fur and gently patting him dry with a towel. They fed him warm broth, and a few bites of chicken, which he gobbled down eagerly. Rusty seemed to come alive with each bite, his tail wagging ever so slightly, a spark returning to his eyes. That night, as Sophie lay in bed, she felt Rusty curl up at her feet, his soft breathing a comforting rhythm in the quiet room. She felt a sense of peace settle over her, knowing that she'd made a friend, one who seemed to need her just as much as she needed him. The days passed, and Rusty grew stronger. He followed Sophie everywhere, trotting beside her as she walked to school and waiting patiently by the door when she returned. They became inseparable, a pair bound together by a rainy day and an unspoken understanding. One afternoon, as they were playing in the yard, Sophie noticed something glinting around Rusty's neck. It was a small, worn tag that had been hidden beneath his fur. She gently turned it over, squinting to make out the faint letters. Her heart skipped a beat. The tag had an address, just a few blocks away. Sophie's heart felt heavy. She'd grown so close to Rusty, but she knew what she had to do. That evening, she told her mom about the address on Rusty's tag. They decided to visit it together the next day. The house was small, with a neatly kept yard and a porch decorated with potted plants. A kind-faced elderly man answered the door, his eyes widening when he saw Rusty. "Buddy," he whispered, kneeling down as Rusty trotted over, tail wagging wildly. The man hugged Rusty, and tears filled his eyes. He explained that Rusty, Buddy, as he called him, had been his companion for years, but had run off during a thunderstorm. He'd searched everywhere, even put up posters, but had almost given up hope. Sophie felt a bittersweet tug in her heart as she watched their reunion. She knew Rusty had found his home again, but she couldn't shake the sadness of letting him go. The man looked up at her, his voice full of gratitude. "Thank you for bringing him back. You have no idea what this means to me." Sophie nodded, forcing a smile. She knelt down and gave Rusty one last hug. "Take care, Rusty," she whispered, feeling his fur under her fingertips for what she knew would be the last time. As she and her mom walked home in the soft drizzle that had begun to fall, Sophie felt both the ache of loss and the warmth of having done something good. Rusty Buddy was home, safe, and loved, just as he deserved. And as she walked away, she knew she'd carry the memory of that rainy day, and the scruffy dog who had become her friend, in her heart forever. Story 3. The rain had been falling for days, a relentless curtain of gray that transformed the town into a quiet, misty world. To most, it was the kind of weather that kept people inside, curled up with a book or a warm cup of tea. But for Marco, a painter known for his vivid landscapes, the rain had become both a blessing and a curse. It had been months since Marco had painted anything he was proud of. His work felt stale, lifeless, as if each brushstroke drained the color from his own soul instead of bringing it to the canvas. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when he could lose himself in his work, painting from dawn until dusk, each canvas a world of its own, alive and vibrant. But lately, his inspiration had vanished, leaving him with blank canvases and a growing sense of frustration. One dreary morning, tired of staring at the empty canvas in his studio, Marco decided to go for a walk. He grabbed his coat, put on his worn boots, and stepped into the rain. The world outside was washed in shades of gray, the colors muted and softened by the mist. As he wandered through the quiet streets, he found himself drawn to the edges of town, where the countryside began. The path he chose was muddy, winding between fields and ancient trees, with puddles forming along the way. He walked with no real direction, his mind as gray as the sky above. But then, something unexpected caught his eye. A small hill, just off the path, crowned by a solitary oak tree. From where he stood, he could see the whole valley spread out before him, mist rising from the trees, puddles reflecting the dim light, and raindrops adding ripples to the stillness. The scene was breathtaking in its simplicity, a quiet beauty that felt almost otherworldly. For the first time in months, Marco felt a flicker of inspiration. Without hesitation, he hurried back to his studio, grabbed his easel, brushes, and a canvas, and returned to the hill. He set up under the wide branches of the oak tree, just enough shelter to keep his canvas dry as the rain continued to fall softly around him. He took a deep breath, feeling the damp air fill his lungs, and began to paint. He started with the sky, layering shades of gray and blue, capturing the way the clouds seemed to melt into the horizon. His brush danced over the canvas, moving with a newfound energy. He painted the mist that clung to the trees, the puddles that dotted the valley, the faint green of grass peeking through the rain. The world around him was quiet, the only sounds the patter of raindrops and the soft whisper of the wind. As he worked, Marco felt something shift within him. He wasn't just painting the landscape. He was painting the feeling of it, the gentle solitude, the calm that had settled over everything. Hours passed, but he barely noticed. He lost himself in the colors, the textures, the movement of the rain, and as he painted, memories surfaced. His childhood in a small coastal village, where he'd first fallen in love with the ocean's grays and blues. The long walks he'd taken with his father in the rain, learning to appreciate the quiet beauty of a storm. The laughter of friends as they watched the clouds roll in, huddled under the eaves. With each brushstroke, he was pouring pieces of himself into the canvas, a lifetime of memories woven into every line and color. It was as if he'd finally found a way to reconnect with the things that had inspired him in the first place. By the time he finished, the rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle, and the sky was beginning to clear, revealing patches of pale blue. Marco stepped back, looking at his work. The painting was unlike anything he'd ever done. It was subtle, yet filled with emotion, a reflection of the rain-soaked valley and the peace he'd found there. He stayed there for a while, watching as the valley emerged from the mist, transformed by the rain. He felt a sense of calm settle over him, a quiet contentment that he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just a painting. It was a reminder of why he'd started painting in the first place, an appreciation for the beauty in the simple, the quiet, the unnoticed. When he finally returned to his studio, canvas in hand, he felt as though a weight had lifted from him. The rain had washed away his doubts, his frustrations, leaving him with a renewed sense of purpose. He placed the painting on his easel, where he could see it every day, a reminder of that rainy afternoon on the hill. From then on, Marco painted with a different kind of passion. His work was softer, quieter, but filled with a depth that spoke to anyone who saw it. He no longer chased after vibrant colors or grand scenes. Instead, he focused on capturing the quiet beauty of the world around him, inspired by that rainy day when he'd rediscovered his love for painting. And whenever he felt lost or uninspired, he would walk back to that hill, standing under the old oak tree, letting the rain wash over him, and remember that sometimes the simplest moments held the greatest beauty. Story 4. It was one of those rare storms that swept in out of nowhere, drenching the town and turning streets into rivers within minutes. I had been back home for less than a week, visiting family after years away, and wasn't expecting to run into anyone, let alone to end up caught in the middle of a downpour. But there I was, huddled under the awning of a little cafe on Main Street, waiting for the rain to let up so I could dash back to my car. And then I saw her. At first, it was just a blur of red as she darted under the awning beside me, out of breath and soaked through. I glanced over, and the shock hit me like a flash of lightning. It was Emma, my best friend from high school, the girl I'd spent every free moment with, and the one I'd left behind when I moved away for college. Emma, I blurted out. almost not believing it. She turned, eyes wide, and a grin spread across her face as recognition dawned. "Jake! Oh my God! Is it really you?" Her voice was the same, warm and surprised, with that little lilt at the end that always made me laugh. We just stood there, staring at each other, caught somewhere between disbelief and joy. She looked a bit older, of course, but that same spark was still there, the one that made every adventure feel like magic. And as we huddled under the awning, the rain pouring around us like a curtain, the years seemed to fall away. "It's been forever," she laughed, brushing wet hair out of her face. "What brings you back here?" "Just visiting family," I said, shaking my head with a chuckle. I didn't expect to run into anyone, especially not you. We exchanged stories. She told me about her work as a teacher at the local elementary school, about how she'd stayed in town when so many others had left. I shared stories of my life in the city, the busy days and the late nights, the way I sometimes missed the calm simplicity of this place. The conversation flowed as easily as it always had, and I realized how much I'd missed her. When a crash of thunder rumbled overhead, Emma laughed, looking up at the rain. "Looks like it's not letting up anytime soon. How about we grab a coffee inside?" We stepped into the warmth of the cafe, the air filled with the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the chatter of other storm-bound souls. We found a little table by the window, where we could watch the rain hammering against the glass, a soft gray blur outside. It felt almost surreal, like we were the only two people in the world. As we sipped our drinks, the conversation turned to memories. Late nights spent stargazing by the lake, our favorite hiking trails, the endless conversations we'd had about our dreams. I could feel the nostalgia settling in, a bittersweet reminder of all the moments we'd shared and everything that had been left unsaid. At one point, she paused, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "You know, I always wondered if you'd ever come back." I looked at her, feeling a lump in my throat that I couldn't quite swallow. "I thought about it," I admitted quietly, "about coming back, about us. But I guess I was too scared of what I'd find. Or maybe I was just scared it was too late." She smiled softly, her gaze steady. "It doesn't feel too late right now." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain had softened, a gentle rhythm tapping against the window, filling the silence between us. I could feel the weight of all those years, all the choices and paths we'd taken, and the question lingering between us, what if? The moment felt fragile, like it could break at any second. But I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. Her fingers were warm, and as she looked down at our hands, I saw a hint of surprise in her eyes, but also a softness, a quiet hope. We didn't say much after that. We just sat there, watching the rain, holding on to that shared silence as if it was something precious. I felt a warmth spreading through me, something that hadn't been there in a long time, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was still time to rewrite the ending. Eventually, the storm began to clear, the clouds parting to reveal patches of blue sky. We stepped outside, the streets now glistening with puddles and reflections, a world washed clean by the rain. As we stood there, I turned to her. "Emma," I started, my voice steady but full of 1,000 unsaid things. "Would you like to meet up again? Maybe go for a walk by the lake, just like old times?" She looked up at me, her smile as bright as the sunlight breaking through the clouds. "I'd like that, Jake. I'd like that a lot." And just like that, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't flashy, but it felt like the beginning of something real. A second chance, rekindling. A story paused but never truly finished. As we walked side by side down the rain-soaked streets, our laughter mingling with the sound of water dripping from the rooftops, I realized that sometimes life's best surprises come in the middle of a storm. Story 5. It was one of those gray, misty mornings where the rain hung in the air, more a fine drizzle than a downpour. The kind of morning where everything felt muted, softened by the fog, and the park was almost empty. I hadn't planned on going for a walk that day, but something about the quietness drew me out, and I found myself wandering along the familiar paths, my shoes crunching softly over wet gravel. Then I noticed him, a little boy, probably no older than 6, standing by a large puddle, staring down at his reflection with intense concentration. He was dressed in a bright yellow raincoat and boots that looked a size too big, with his hood pulled up over a mess of dark curls. Alone and focused, he seemed completely absorbed in his own little world. As I approached, he didn't even glance up, just kept staring down at the puddle as if it held some deep secret. I stopped a few feet away, curious. I'd expected the park to be empty, but there he was, standing in the drizzle, his small frame somehow both determined and lost. "Hey there," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "What are you up to?" He finally looked up, blinking at me with wide, brown eyes. There was a solemnity to him, a seriousness that felt out of place on someone so young. "I'm looking for fish," he replied, as if it were the most obvious answer in the world. "Fish," I repeated, smiling. "In the middle of the park." He nodded, dead serious. "My dad says fish like the rain. He says they come to the surface when it rains." I chuckled softly, but I felt something tug at my heart. "Your dad sounds pretty smart." The boy shrugged, looking back at the puddle. "He's gone right now, but he'll be back soon." He didn't elaborate, but the way he said it made me wonder. The quiet conviction in his voice held both hope and a hint of uncertainty. I crouched down beside him, peering into the puddle as if I, too, might spot something. "Well, I don't see any fish here," I said, after a moment. "But maybe they're just hiding. Fish can be pretty sneaky." He grinned at that, the solemn expression breaking for the first time. "Do you think they're scared of me?" "Could be. Or maybe they're just waiting for the right moment. Fish are patient like that," I told him, playing along. He seemed to like that idea, nodding thoughtfully. Then, after a long pause, he looked up at me with a serious expression. "Do you think he'll come back?" There it was, the question he'd really been asking, buried under the talk of fish and puddles. I felt my throat tighten, unsure of how to answer. Part of me wanted to promise him that everything would be all right, that whoever he was waiting for would come back soon. But I knew better than to make promises I couldn't keep. So I took a breath and gave him the only answer I could. "I think sometimes people go away for a while, but that doesn't mean they stop caring. And when it rains, maybe it's their way of letting us know they're still thinking of us." He considered this, his small face contemplative. "So, you think he's thinking of me?" "I do," I said, nodding. How could he not? The boy's face softened, and he looked back down at the puddle, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, just watching the tiny raindrops ripple across the surface of the puddle. Finally, he took a deep breath, straightening up. "Well, if he's thinking of me, then I guess I don't have to wait here forever." I smiled, feeling a strange warmth spread through me. "That sounds like a good plan. Besides, you'll get soaked out here if you stay too long." He laughed, a real, bright laugh that seemed to cut through the grayness of the day. Then he looked up at me, his eyes shining. "Thanks for helping me look for fish." "Anytime," I said, watching as he turned and started to walk down the path, his bright yellow raincoat bobbing through the mist. As he disappeared from view, I found myself lingering by the puddle, staring down at my own reflection in the water. There were no fish there, of course, just rain and ripples, but somehow, the park felt a little less empty, a little brighter. I took one last look down the path, where he'd gone, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. Sometimes, a simple encounter can remind you of things you thought you'd forgotten, like how to believe in small miracles or how to find light in a rainy day. With a deep breath, I turned and started back home, feeling the drizzle on my face, grateful for the quiet magic of that morning and the little boy who had, in his own way, reminded me to see the world through hopeful eyes once again. Story 6. The rain had come out of nowhere, a sudden shower sweeping over the valley just as I reached the edge of the flower field. It was a place I hadn't visited in years, not since my husband had passed, but something had drawn me there that day, tugging at me like a quiet whisper, a nudge from the past. The field stretched out before me, a blanket of colors softened by the mist. Bright reds, purples, and yellows dotted the landscape, their petals heavy with raindrops, bending ever so slightly under the weight. This was our place, our sanctuary during the early days, where we'd come to walk, to talk, to escape the world. And though I'd avoided it since he'd been gone, that day I felt an odd pull to return, almost as if he were waiting for me. I moved slowly, the wet grass brushing against my ankles, each step carrying me deeper into a swirl of memories. I could almost see him beside me, his warm, steady hand holding mine, his laughter mixing with the rustling of the leaves. We used to call this place our little miracle, and in many ways, it had been. We'd shared our dreams here, our secrets, and even our silent worries, never knowing just how much time we'd have. A light drizzle turned into a steady rain, but I didn't mind. The water felt refreshing, like a gentle reminder that I was still here, that life was still moving, even if it felt different now. I kept walking, running my fingers over the petals as I passed, remembering how he'd pick flowers and tuck them behind my ear, laughing when I'd blush. Then, as I reached the heart of the field, I felt an odd sensation, a warmth cutting through the chill of the rain. I looked up, and there, just above me, a break appeared in the thick clouds, a sudden, unexpected patch of blue, like a window to the sky beyond. It was beautiful, breathtaking even, but there was something more to it. As I watched, a single beam of sunlight pierced through the gap, bathing the field in a soft, golden light. It illuminated the flowers around me, making them glow as if touched by some quiet, hidden magic. And there, standing in the middle of that circle of light, I felt an overwhelming sense of his presence, stronger than I'd ever felt it before. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the light sink in, and in that moment, I could almost feel his arms around me, his voice soft in my ear. "I'm here," it seemed to say, though there were no words, just a feeling, a knowing that went beyond anything I could explain. Tears blurred my vision as I opened my eyes, but I found myself smiling, a real smile, one I hadn't felt in a long time. Somehow, I knew that this was his way of letting me know he hadn't truly left. He was here, woven into the beauty of this place, in the petals, in the rain, in the light that had found me on a day when I needed it most. The sunbeam lingered for just a few minutes, but those minutes felt like a lifetime. I stayed still, breathing in the moment, the scent of rain and wildflowers filling the air. And then, as gently as it had come, the light faded, the clouds closing once more, the rain returning to its quiet patter. I stood there for a while longer, alone yet not alone, letting the calm wash over me. It was a strange, quiet miracle, something that didn't need explaining. I didn't need to understand it, to dissect it. I just needed to feel it, to let it fill the empty spaces inside me. As I turned to leave, I plucked a small, white daisy from the field, tucking it behind my ear as he used to do. I could almost hear his chuckle, see his warm smile, and I knew, in my heart, that I'd carry this moment with me forever. The field, our little sanctuary, had given me one last gift, a reminder that love didn't vanish with loss, that it lingered, like the scent of flowers after a rain, filling the world with quiet beauty, waiting to be found when we least expected it. With each step back toward the path, I felt lighter, a renewed sense of peace settling over me. It was as if he'd left me a part of himself in that beam of light, a simple but powerful reminder that I wasn't alone. And as I looked back over the field, glistening with rain and memory, I whispered a soft thank you to the open sky, feeling his presence one last time before the rain began to fall again, washing over the world in a gentle, healing embrace.